February 13th, it's World Radio Day.
Through FM, longwave, digital or the internet.
Radio hands you the mic, gives you the floor, listens to you.
Radio, your anonymous access to verified information.
On the 13th of February, let's celebrate radio together with UNESCO.
Radio Day 2019, that is what we are celebrating today on the 13th of February. And radio can provide a platform for dialogue and civic participation among diverse groups in societies. And these exchanges do help to raise awareness among listeners, and they also prove to be inspiring and to create new perspectives in spite of there being differences. Now, I am now joined by Lujina Haj Youssef, who is from Rosanna FM, which is a radio station that is specifically looking at the war and conflict-ridden country of Syria. Rujana, welcome to World Radio Day. A happy World Radio Day to you.
Yes, and congratulations for all the people who was working with this magic box, which is called radio. Thanks for your invite. Actually, Radio Rosanna, it's a very local Syrian radio. We're based now in Paris and Turkey. We have 2 studios. Of course, after 2011, the Syrian find that there is a very big need to have independent media platform that can give them democracy and a voice for the democracy people and to express the opinion and freedom. So this was the main to start with Radio Rosanna, and then we, through our work, we started to empowerment the women, the children, all the Syrian. We are seek to be a voice for all the Syrian, to empower also the dialogue in a conflict area like Syria.
And so how do you use your radio station to engage with your audience and ensure that they are involved in the conversations that impact their own lives? Because we understand that there are various parties involved when it comes to what is happening in Syria. But what is it about your particular radio station that speaks to the heart of the matter and speaks to those that are on the ground, whose lives are affected as we speak?
Yes, actually we are in our program focusing about this level of the people who are suffering, who are feeling of losing their humanity under all this conflict. So we all the time try to go inside these places. We have a big network inside Syria. We are working with the citizen journalists inside, and they are all the time bringing the features, the report, also giving the voice for these people inside our programming, especially in the political programs and also in the another programs that focusing on the needs for like health issues and also for the services.
And you speak about these internal networks that you foster through your programming, but are there other radio stations across the world that perhaps are dealing with similar situations that you have a network with as well and that you collaborate with and strategize together with?
Yes. Actually, because we are very local radio, so we try to collaborate with other Syrian platforms, but it wasn't that easy if we want to say or talk about that, because there's in conflict area already they will be have linked to a political or religion agenda sometimes. Rosanna, it's very independent. It's not linked to any party or any religion agenda. So it was very difficult sometimes to work in editorial lines. So we tried to collaborate like for the services. We have before 2 years, we have a very big programs that collaborate with 6 Syrian local radio too, and we were like for 2 hours each day to bring the services and going inside for the Syrian lives. But then because most of them now they unfortunately closed, so today we are going to have something it's more efficient for the journalist. We decided to collaborate with other media to have an ethics charter that can build a very journalism culture, professional journalism culture through these media platforms.
And you speak of having an interactive style of communicating to your audience. Can you elaborate on that?
Actually, we are all the time interactive with our audience through the FM, with the calls and also with the messaging. Also, we have live Facebook now, so it was easy to interactive with the people inside the country and even in the borders, the Syrian who is also in the border, like in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Turkey, and sometimes for the Syrian refugees who was in Europe now. So we are communicating with them or making the interactive platform also in this one, Facebook, maybe sometimes also the calls, messages, and all the new digital media can give us for interactive with them.
Of course, but going back to radio and specifically your radio station, how does your programming foster partnerships with other organizations that are also aiming to bring change and peace to Syria?
Actually, yes. As I said, we are collaborator for the Ethic Charter. We faced that and we discovered that through these 7 years of conflict, there is a lot of hate of speech that is coming through the programs and the citizen journalist work. So we tried to raise up the dialogue between the people, dialogue between the parties, even the political one, and also to avoid the hate of speech through inside the programs, to how and learn the people how to accept each other opinion and how they should know that the democracy, it's not meaning that what I believe also that I have to respect what the others believes too. So it's not easy to do that, but we are raising up this kind of programs with defining the hate of speech, fake news, and all of these issues that can help to build the peace between them.
Well, your radio station certainly is one that speaks to the heart of the theme for UNESCO World Radio Day, which is peace, tolerance, and dialogue through the medium of radio. Thank you very much for your time. And World Radio Day is a time to reflect, celebrate, and put into action a lot of things in the name of tolerance. And speaking of someone who knows more about this, perhaps through an academic lens, is Dr. Daniel P. Aldrich, who published his findings through research that he did in Mali, Chad, and Niger. The article is called Radio as the Voice of God, Peace and Tolerance Radio Programming's Impact on Norms. Have a listen to the interview that I did with him. Dr. Daniel Aldrich is the Director of Security and Resilience Studies Program in Political Science and Public Policy, that is at Northeastern University in the United States, with 5 books published and over 40 peer-reviewed articles. His research includes post-disaster recovery, the interaction between civil society and the state, the socialization of women and men, as well as peace and radio programming's impact on the world. And we will be focusing more on the latter, of course, for purposes of World Radio Day. Of course, looking at tolerance, peace, and dialogue. Welcome to the show, Dr. Aldrich, and a happy World Radio Day to you.
Thank you for having me.
What sparked your interest to investigate radio's impact?
Actually, a visit to Rwanda had really begun this project for me. There at the museum that had memorialized the genocide there, I heard from someone whose family had been killed that radio had played a very negative role during that genocide, where the radio programs had broadcast negative messages about Tutsis, calling them cockroaches. And I wondered if radio had played this tremendously negative role in past events like a genocide, they must have some very powerful influences on broader society. So I began wondering to the degree to which radios could be used for the opposite goal of building tolerance, of building peace, of reducing violence in societies where violent extremism might be on the rise. So that really was the moment for me that sparked this interest.
So you mentioned Rwanda, but your studies also include other African countries. What were those countries, and what were your findings when it came to the kind of programming content that was discussed at the radio stations in those respective countries?
Yes, so I began looking primarily in Mali, Chad, and Niger, and we had a very broad-scale survey of more than 1,000 people across those countries, and we found, very interestingly enough, that this peace and radiance tolerance radio programming had the impact of reducing a number of negative behaviors and thoughts. For example, individuals who listened to this kind of programming became more involved in local civic society, became more involved in governance, and they also were more willing to see the West as an ally in a fight against terrorism. And these are very positive results because the communities where we're studying were not necessarily urban, well-educated ones, but more commonly rural ones, undereducated, underinvested communities which have every reason to see the West not as an ally and every reason as well to pursue violence as a way of solving problems.
Do you believe then, based on those findings, that radio could be used as a conduit to not only open up dialogue in communities, but beyond borders as well?
Absolutely, and I think this is the power of radio. Of course, beyond the obvious, which is that even for individuals who themselves are not yet literate and live in societies where they may be marginalized or deliberately discriminated against, radio can provide even those communities with new ideas, access to their own voices, access to local and critical concepts that otherwise they might be exposed to. So I believe radio has a tremendous potential to help change norms and behaviors around the world.
And what challenges did you experience whilst researching your
Well, there's some obvious
theory?
ones with operating in countries where there are unfortunately violent extremist organizations, including Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, other communities that are dedicated, unfortunately, to terrorism and to negative activities. So we had to be very careful in our studies to make sure that not only we didn't put ourselves at danger, but we didn't put the people we're talking to at danger as well. And also it's very challenging as well to reach many of these communities, as I mentioned, and not necessarily in urban communities where it's easy to find them. We often travel great distances to try to find individuals living in remote areas that were underserved by both the government and the NGOs, but nonetheless, individuals in those communities had access to radios and therefore to radio programming.
And in terms of radio being a catalyst once again, were there discussions that were held on radio with members of the community that then started perhaps other organizations that were linked to whatever topics that you were dealing with? In other words, were you able to have a discussion or discussions that then started organizations that dealt with these discussions? So the conversation was not just left after the radio interview was done.
Yes, exactly. And we call these generative loops, when individuals may first hear an idea on the radio program and then themselves advocate in their community and even with local radio programming. So because many of these communities, there is one radio station nearby, they're able to go there and argue for or even present their own ideas there. So it might have a very positive feedback cycle where individuals hear about something, whether it's, for example, an argument against young girls getting married, or an argument for sharing property, providing property rights to women, or in some of these cases, reasons why they would not want to, for example, let their families marry into violent extremist organizations. And those discussions, which may already be going on in the community, can be joined then by individuals throughout the community, individuals far from each other who may not even be in the same area or reachable by foot, but those radio waves carry those messages for them. So this is one of the more amazing moments. Because radio can be so localized and the programming can be created by local individuals, we can have programming, for example, for women's groups. We noticed a number of times that women often formed their own listening groups. They would invite friends to come over and spend time in their homes or nearby outside, listening in a courtyard to the radio program, and then in many cases either write a letter collectively or go to advocate for the idea they'd heard about, either for the local government or for the radio station. So these were very positive outcomes that we saw generated by the radio programming and then picked up by communities in the area.
And did you find that this was specifically because radio was the medium being used and not any other media?
Yes, it's funny. In the West, I think many of us assume that, for example, cell phones and the Internet have gone everywhere. And it's true in many countries within Africa, that is true. But still there are pockets, especially in the parts of the Sahara, where that's not yet true. Even in those areas, though, radio programming can move. Radio waves still travel, even if there's no cell phone towers nearby. So absolutely, I think the technology, the medium of radio, allows for a number of things. First of all, it allows, as I mentioned, for communities that are not yet literate to participate in a discussion. They themselves can listen and be heard, even if they have not yet received education and formal schooling. They also might be deliberately denied access in some cases by groups, whether the government or others. Radios are portable, they can be hidden, and they can provide them with information, even if the government or communities don't want them having that information. They also have this tremendously low cost and off-the-grid option. Many of the radios provided these days by NGOs, for example, don't require batteries. They're hand-cranked, meaning you don't need to be tethered to a grid or reliant on electricity. So all of these reasons make these radios far more robust and also accessible than technology that we might associate with broader broadcasting, like televisions, for example, or the Internet. So yes, I think the power of radio precisely is the portability, the accessibility, the fact that it can be done off the grid, and the fact that radio waves can go so far in local communities that otherwise have no direct education or formal schooling.
And then in terms of what happens with that content, once these round tables or discussions and dialogues are held, what of that information, aside from you taking it and basing theories around it, just on a hyper-local level with the actual communities, the case studies, if you will, do they have access to their own information, and are they able to disseminate that amongst themselves?
So, this is a real challenge. It often depends on a number of factors beyond the control of the community. For example, the openness and transparency of the government, the democratic level of the government, how responsive they are to local needs. What we saw happening often was that communities would try to solve their own problems rather than reaching out to a regional or national government, especially rural communities, for example, in Mali, where many parts of the country remain ungoverned. And literally there are not police officers or schools or even roads for hundreds of kilometers. So in those communities, we often saw the impact was primarily local. Local individuals hearing the programming, reaching out to each other, to other communities nearby, whether it was an imam nearby asking for guidance, or a local town council member or head of a tribe. Those individuals were then contacted by people listening to the radio. So the government question, what the government can do, often is a function external to these kind of outcomes.
Is there anything else that you want to mention specifically around the voice of God? I
think, for us, radio is certainly not a silver bullet that can solve every problem. And of course, it could still be used, as we saw in Rwanda, for negative information, that is to say for hate and for prejudice. But I think the real interesting findings that we saw from our work, especially in Chad, Niger, and Mali, was that these local communities, with deliberate intent, can help reduce violence, can help reduce support for violent extremism, and can help build up connections that otherwise might be quite tenuous. And the power, I think, especially for both the Western countries interested in aid, for NGOs like World Vision or Red Cross, I think the power of radio is still something we should be thinking about. Even as we transition, for example, to wireless, to cell phones and so forth, because of the expense of cell phones, because of the maintenance required, and because of the need for things like cell phone towers, I still believe that radio is a more robust network right now. And again, the generative aspect of it, where people can create their own programming. So I think there's tremendous potential for the use of radio, especially in the worlds of development and peace building.
That's Dr. Daniel P. Aldrich, who is the director of the Security and Resilience Studies program that is at Northeastern University in the U.S., talking all things peace, tolerance, and dialogue, and how radio can facilitate that. You can go read up on his findings, radio as the voice of God. Thank you very much, Dr. Daniel.
A pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
February 13th, it's World Radio Day.
Through FM, longwave, digital, or the internet,
Radio hands you the mic, gives you the floor, listens to you.
Radio, your anonymous access to verified information.
On the 13th of February, let's celebrate radio together with UNESCO.